Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Welcome back to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm your host, one of your hosts, Bryan, and I'm joined with my co-host, Jim Reski. We are going to be looking at Romans chapter 7. Jim is going to be teaching on a couple chapters in the book of Romans in a few weeks. And so we like to kind of do our Bible study together. And we're excited to talk through this chapter. It's really a depiction of the human heart. Talks about what our biggest problem is, that we have the desire to do what is right, but we don't have the power to do it. And that's because there's a deep splitness in our heart. So that's some of the top stuff we're going to be talking about. Jim, what's on your mind right now?
Well, Greg, so great to be with you. Great to be doing the podcast again. Just thanks for the listeners we have too. And I just want to remind them that, you and I are nothing special. We're just two guys who are addicted to the gospel, right? We just love Jesus. And as part of what we do in our church, we lead this, we're on the leadership team, I guess, of this Bible study. So we are on the speaking team anyway. And so we rotate through and so what we try to do, like you said, is just use this time to prepare. But the going back, the original genesis of doing this podcast together was just, we have all these spiritual conversations all the time. We talk about these things, we wrestle with these things. We say, I don't know, I don't understand this. What do you think? You say, I don't know, what do you think? And we have this conversation. We thought maybe others would benefit from them, and we're just wrestling with a word. And so that's why we're using it now to look at the kind of passages we're going to speak on or teach on, and wrestle into the ground and see what we can learn from each other and what the word has to teach us. And we thought others would benefit from that. So,
and you know what, Jim, others are benefiting. In
really?
Fact, we keep breaking into new countries. So
really,
we actually have listeners in Botswana.
Really?
Yep. And we have a listener in Serbia.
Hello, Botswana and Serbia. Welcome.
Yeah. So we continue to have a presence in Australia, South Africa, Italy, Spain, Canada. I mean, it's kind of exciting to just think about all the people listening in all these different countries. Ghana is one of our strong, and then of course the UK, Germany, Poland. So it's pretty cool. Malaysia even.
It's just wonderful. The people all over the world who love Jesus. And so welcome to all of you listeners out there. And, hopefully you're addicted to the gospel too, that just I can't believe God takes people like us and gives us grace and saves us from our sins. So we're just so happy to be part of the body of Christ, and so excited that the body of Christ is global, that there's people and multicultural, there's people everywhere, every tribe and tongue, the Bible says, right? Worshiping Jesus together. And I've just known that, I know Greg, because I know you work with, we're both in America, but you work with internationals all the time, people from other countries. And when you meet someone who knows Jesus from anywhere in the world, and they say, oh, you know Jesus too. And that feeling of connection, because that you're two souls, whatever our cultures are, two souls saved by the blood of our Savior. So. It's
amazing how quickly two believers can bond.
Yeah.
Because our faith is such an important thing. It should be the most important thing. And so when you share that with somebody, it doesn't matter what race they're from or what country they're from, what ethnicity, you have that bond. And it's a beautiful thing. It's really a beautiful thing about the body of Christ. Jim, we're going to be talking about Romans 7, and both of us are going to be using some of the same source material. And right. I think it's something we should mention, just in case people want to take a look into this themselves. You want to mention what that material is?
Yeah. So a while back, my wife and I lived in New York City and attended Redeemer Presbyterian Church, where Dr. Timothy Keller is the pastor. And he has a couple sermons on this. So full credit, full attribution. In fact, a lot of what we'll do today is kind of summarize those. he has a sermon series on Romans 6, 7, and 8. And the Romans 6 sermon is available in the public domain. You can search it on YouTube and get a audio version of it and find it. I think it's called Perfect Freedom.
Yes.
You posted it on this podcast, right?
Yes, we have it posted in our podcast. I think it's episode 35, if I remember correctly. But if you just, if you Google Gospel Addict and then Perfect Freedom, I think you'll find it.
Okay, so people can find that. The other ones are not. They're not available publicly for free. They are available, though, for purchase. You go to their website is Gospel in Life, and we're not affiliated with them in any way whatsoever, but that's where to find them. If you want to find them and hear Tim Keller's sermons on these, his sermon series, and it's available as part of a sermon series on Romans 6, 7, 8. I think there's a number of sermons in the sermon series. You purchase it for one price and download it. But it's gospelinlife.com. Three words all together, gospelinlife.com. And this sermons, like I said, 6 is public, but then 7 and 8, those 3 are all part of a series, go together. And his kind of intro to the sermon series, he says that, and at the beginning of each one of these sermons, you'll hear him say the same thing, that he had become a Christian, but even though he was a Christian, there are things in his life that need a profound change and weren't really changing. And so you say, I'm a Christian, but they're not really, the change isn't happening. And then he said he listened to John Stott, or read materials or listened to materials from John Stott and John Owen, who is someone who lived a while ago. So he would have read John Owen's materials. And he said those Christians took him to Romans 6, 7, and 8. And so it's really from those materials he put this together. And that's a lot of what Greg and I are referring to tonight. So the Romans 6 sermon we posted, that's Perfect Freedom. The Romans 7 one tonight is called Splitness. And yes, he breaks it down really well. But I think just in context, he'll say Romans 6 is really the principles to apply. Then Romans 7, which we'll talk about tonight, is the heart to which the principles need to be applied. And then when we get to Romans 8 next time, that is how to apply the principles to the heart. The principles to apply, the heart to which the principles need to be applied, and then how to apply those principles. So tonight it's all about the heart.
That's great. Well, how about if we read the chapter together?
Yeah. Let's do that. And by the way, a little warning to our listeners, we'll follow Keller's outline for this because we both just think it really breaks it down really well. But what he does is he will do kind of walk backwards from back to front. We'll explain all that in a minute, but we're just going to read it because we both believe that the Word of God is powerful and just on its own. And so if you're listening to this podcast, driving to work or something, now we're just gonna read Romans 7 together, so you get the benefit of hearing the word read out loud to you. So, Greg, why don't you start 7:1 and you take the first section, and then I'll take through verse 6, and I'll pick up from there, and we'll just switch off.
Okay, sounds good. Verse 1, Romans 7. Or do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law is binding on a person only as long as he lives. For a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from the law, and if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. Likewise, my brother, you have also died to the law through the body of Christ, so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. For while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. But while we were released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we serve in a new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code.
Okay, and I'll pick up at verse 7. What shall we then say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me. So the law is holy and the commandment is holy and righteous and good.
I can pick up in verse 13. Did that which is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin producing death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold under sin. For I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep doing. Now, if I do not do what this is crazy. This is
it's a tongue twister.
Verse 20. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me.
Okay, verse 21. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, I myself serve the law of God with my mind, but with my flesh, I serve the law of sin. Wow.
An interesting chapter.
Oh, yeah, it's great. It's great. So we got to talk about kind of how Keller breaks this down. I think is a great outline. He goes from back to front. One thought before we start though, Greg, I think that we've talked before about how some Christians look at Christianity as like a steady progression of righteousness. Like Jesus starts me off with the Christian life. We always say this in this podcast. It's a misconception that the gospel is the ABCs of the Christian life and the rest is up to me through my hard work and effort. We'll talk about that more tonight. And when they read this through that paradigm, what they say is, Paul said it's, his progress is lumpy. Okay. So it wasn't, perfect, but he was making progress and he was struggling and he was kind of continually climbing up that ladder of righteousness, becoming a better and better person, because that's what in that misconception, they say that's the point of the Christian life. That's what he was doing. And I think they're just not reading this at all. They're not listening at all. Right. I mean, and in fact, if you read it that way, it's like you almost get angry at Paul because it's a sense of complete false modesty because Paul is so far up that ladder. If that was the way Christianity really worked, you start off as a zero. Christ gives you a fresh start. Now, to your point, climb the ladder, and Paul's like a 9.9 out of a scale of 1 to 10, 0 to 10. And he looks back and says, "Oh, it's so hard being me. Oh, you have no idea. I struggle. It's bad. Come on, it's ridiculous." For someone like that to talk that way, it's like false modesty. It's almost insulting. And I think if you read it that way, you're just really not getting the gospel at all. So that's my quick intro.
It's true. Yeah. And I think that one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is because it's just so easy. I don't think it's clearly taught. It's clearly taught that sanctification, one thing that is clearly taught in most evangelical churches is that salvation is by grace through faith in Christ alone.
That's right.
But what's not taught is how do we grow in the Christian life?
That's right.
What is it? Just through our hard work and effort? Is it just like, grit your teeth and just become a good person? Just, is it centered on us, or is it something different? And I think that what we've discovered is that the same gospel that brought us to Jesus is what grows us in our Christian life. Like it's We never, the cross just keeps growing and
That's
just
right.
keeps getting bigger.
It's the A to
And
Z of the Christian life, right? Not the ABCs.
yes, it's not the ABCs, it's the A to Z's. So, well, let's dive into this.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
So Keller starts at the like verse 18, where he says, and he says that the basic, what Paul's trying to lay out here is that what our biggest problem is. And our biggest problem is the deep, deep splitness of the human heart, that kind of dual nature. Because he says in verse 18, I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh, for I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good that I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. And so he says, you have this deep thing in you that you say, I really want to be good. I really want to be good, but I don't have the ability to carry it out. It's so it's like he's saying there's something evil within me. There's something very deep and evil within me. And I can't, I mean, I want to do good, but I can't get rid of it. And so what Keller does in this wonderful sermon is use the whole story of Jekyll and Hyde as kind of a narrative to kind of go through the whole thing. And so you were just listening to it earlier today too, Craig. So do you remember what he was saying about Jekyll and Hyde and how he was weaving that in?
Well, I know one thing he says is in his comparison of Jekyll and Hyde, it's not based on the movies, it's based on the book, because the book leaves out some crucial, I think the ending of the movies are different than the ending in the book.
Yeah. And the ending is really dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me back up one second, because some people will say Romans 7, Paul is reflecting on when he was not a Christian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, before he was a Christian.
Really? I've never heard that. You really?
Yeah, well, that's how they explain away, like the fact that he's saying he can't do anything good.
Wow, man.
You've never heard that before.
I've never, I mean, look, I could see how, if you say basically, look, for our listeners, we'd always try to draw this out. I know it's audio only, but if you had a little scale where the horizontal axis is time and the vertical axis is holiness, and you say the Christianity is a diagonal line that starts at the bottom juncture of those two lines and goes from the bottom left to the top right. In other words, Christianity is a progression of righteousness, and the cross starts you off, but the rest is up to you and your hard work and effort. That's the single line conception of the Christian life. That's what we were describing a second ago when you say it's the ABCs, Gospels ABC starts you out. If that's your paradigm, you say Paul is a 9.9. Of course he's not.
Yeah, there's no way.
No way.
I see this as a Christian.
Because he's such a great Christian. How would he ever say something like this, that he really struggles with sin? That's so, like I said before, it'd be insulting.
So that's one of the ways that they kind of explain away chapter 7, because there's no way if it's that he would be saying these things as a believer in Jesus.
I never heard that.
I think in context, I think it's pretty clear that, especially when you get to Romans 8,
yes,
it's pretty clear that he's talking as a believer. He's sharing his experience as a believer.
What's funny is like, and Keller brings this out in the middle, the second point of this sermon, in the middle of Romans 7, he is talking about what he was like before a Christian, and how he was in the running. He was alive because he was trying to keep all the laws, and we'll get to that in a minute or two here. But that is a little bit of his little biographical sketch of how he was like before a Christian. He was trying to keep the law and trying to be really good, and it wasn't working. And the 10th commandment comes out and kills him, figuratively. We'll get to that in a few minutes here as we keep going through the outline. But that's his like pre-Christian time, when he says pre-Christian, I was trying to be a good person. I was trying to be religious. I was trying to keep the law, and didn't work at all in my heart. And now that I'm a Christian, I mean, all this is present tense, right? He's saying, I find that, I know that, this is verse 18, I know that nothing good dwells in me that is in my flesh. I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. I think if you have that view, Greg, then you're not listening to Paul. And Paul will look at you and say, man, what do I got to do to get through to you? You are not listening to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the ways that they kind of explain the difficulty that they would have with Romans 7 if you have that view that, the Apostle Paul must be the most godly man,
one of the top 5.
One of the top five, right? So anyway, back to the Jekyll and Hyde comparison. So Dr. Jekyll came to realize that he was what he called an incongruous compound of good and evil, of conscience and coveting.
Right.
He felt that his bad nature held his good nature back. He could aspire to do things, but he couldn't follow through with them, just like Romans 7.
Exactly.
Then he comes up with this idea, a potion. He's going to create a potion that will separate the two natures. He will drink the potion at night to let his bad nature out, so that during the day, he will be good, his good self, which will be unencumbered and will be able to realize all of his goals. And when he takes the potion and his bad nature comes out, to his shock, he's far more evil than he dared believed he was.
And Greg,
And that's one of the things that you and I talk about as well, is that just this idea that most people, that we're good people.
yes,
We're all good people.
right.
But we've totally underestimated our sinful nature and
Yes.
our natural bent towards selfishness, self-centeredness, and so we're, part of the lesson of this chapter, the truth of this chapter is we are far more sinful than we ever dare believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
That's a hard thing to swallow for a lot of people.
Well, it is, because you want to say I'm basically a good person. Two great sins of mankind. And they both come up in this chapter. I'm not a bad person. That's number one. And the second one is nobody tells me what to do. And that comes up later too. I mean, but first of all, I'm not, and I don't want to admit that I'm a bad person. I don't think I'm a basically decent person. And Paul says, if you say that, you absolutely don't understand the nature of the human heart. And so the Jekyll and Hyde story, which is a great piece of literature that kind of gets at this idea of how we are. And it's so well written. Did you, it sounds like you're reading from your notes. Did you write down the other passage, what Jekyll says when he does split the two, and he realizes how Mr. Hyde comes out? In the
book, he says, quote, "I knew myself at first breath of this new life to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked than I had thought. And the thought braced and delighted me like wine. This being right. Edward Hyde was inherently malign. His every act and thought centered on self."
Every act. Right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So,
see, that's the heart of wickedness, the heart of evil. And he gets at that in that piece of literature, every act, every thought centered on the self. And I think in our society, even non-believers, non-Christians, whatever side of society you're in, it doesn't have to be US culture, it can be any country. When you see someone totally living from the self, at the expense and at the for others, everyone looks at that and says, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. How could why don't they care about other people? How can you live for yourself? And to the extent you're completely self-centered, that is really evil and really wrong. And that's exactly what Hyde was in the book, where every thought consistently was centered on self. I remember when I read it, he there's a scene when Hyde badly wounds or kills somebody by just walking right over them. And someone witnesses it. And it's like this casual disregard for human life where he just didn't even care about anyone else but himself. And it really hurts somebody physically. It was like it was a homeless woman and just stepped on her and just kept, and just didn't care. Every thought centered on self. And that's what makes him evil.
The interesting thing is that every single one of us, if we think about it, could probably name 10 people that we would classify as incredibly self-centered and narcissistic and potentially wicked or evil.
Whether they were celebrities or people in our own personal life that we know. And the thing we don't like about them is that they're self-centered, right? Yeah. That's the thing you put in there. All they do is think about themselves. And that is the very thing you find evil in them. We don't often see it ourselves, though.
But one of the challenges of this chapter is that we need to look inside. We need to look at our heart, and we need to be honest, have an honest evaluation that we're not as good as we think we are. And we've totally underestimated. And that's where the whole idea that the name of the sermon is Splitness. And you and I, we actually did a podcast because you had a chapter in your book, which I think you've retitled the chapter about this topic. But why don't you explain the idea of the splitness?
Well, you mean the two lines in the illustration, or that part of it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, why did Keller title his sermon "Splitness"?
I think splitness here is because, and he's using it here to talk about how that deep splitness of the heart. In other words, there can be good in you, but there's not the ability to carry it out. And the idea that you are the evil side of you that you don't want to admit, that you don't want to, that the bubbles below the surface until something comes out and brings it out, is far worse than you think it is. And you like to think in that sin of mankind, you say, I think of myself as a good person. I'm not a bad person. You're fooling yourself. You're hiding it from yourself. He says that's why this is called Mr. Hyde in this story. His name is Mr. Hyde because partly because he's hiding it from himself, and partly because his sin is really, really hideous, really, really hideous. And what I thought was interesting about this is that Keller's so Keller, when he's doing this, he's referring to the book, and in the book, it's the potion that splits out the nature. And Jekyll invents the potion so that he can be, when he's good, he can be 100% good, fully good, unencumbered by the sin that holds him back, purely good with no bad motives whatsoever. And then the potion divides the two natures. So when he's bad, he's fully bad, right? And Keller does this in a split second in the sermon, but I was dwelling on it. He says what happens in your life is the potion in your life that does that are circumstances.
Yeah,
circumstances,
stress,
right,
and temptation.
Stress and temptation. He married. He also mentioned marriage to a difficult person. I don't know if he was joking. He got a laugh in the audience when he did that. But just like circumstances that are the potion that bring that out. But I thought about other circumstances that bring it out. When you think about anonymity and unaccountability, what do you do when you're left completely to your own devices? Right? What do you do when you say, no one's going to see what I'm doing? No one's going to know what I'm doing. And there was a great remake of that movie, The Invisible Man. I saw like clips, bits and pieces of it. And the point they were trying to make is once this guy realized he was, and I actually remember seeing part of this and then seeing the interviews with the actors. They said the part we're going to make is once he knew that he could get away with anything because he's invisible. He could walk into, past prison, past guards, do anything he wanted. He became so evil and wicked, like beyond belief, and then had to be stopped. Became a monster, and it was the lack of accountability. And so you think in your own life, and
success can do that to people.
That's absolutely another circumstance.
And money,
and money.
Fame.
Well, or a mob mentality, right? If you're in the middle of a mob and they're all doing one, if you say, I've never really liked those people over there, some other people, but now you're in a mob that's trying to hate those people. Now you feel like it's okay to hate. And I think part of the Holocaust was like that. People didn't have prejudices and biases and all kind of stuff. But once it became publicly okay to hate a certain people group, then all kinds of evil came out. People that would have never done evil things before, who was just left to themselves, they would have had some, that part might have been still hidden. But what brought it out was the mob mentality. It's okay to hate people. You saw that in the Holocaust. I think whenever you see like genocidal things, I remember the Serbian wars in the 90s, Croatia, Serbia, and in some of the massacres in Rwanda and other places, just like people that would never have picked up a weapon and killed their neighbor. But now that everybody is doing it, they realize, yeah, I always hated them. So I think that it's not in this sermon, it's in another sermon. Keller talks about how every one of us has the seeds of evil inside of us to do the capacity for evil. And if you are not the Gestapo prison guard, right, that you think of as someone who's really evil from the old World War II movie, it's only because the seeds you have in your heart that never got watered. That person, and if you have grown up in that person's culture, time period, with their family, their friends, everything around them, who knows what you would have done. And it's only because those seeds, you have the seeds inside you, and they just have never been watered. And that's what he's getting out, this idea, and he's the Jekyll and Hyde metaphor. The capacity you have for evil is so great. I just, again, it's not part of this sermon, but history bears that out. People that would never have thought they would have the capacity to do atrocities ended up doing them. Why'd you do that? Well, everyone was doing it. The mob was doing it, and it was okay. And people just people that commit atrocities, they end up they before the atrocities, they look like you and me, and the capacity for evil was there, and we're all in self-denial because we all have that great incredible capacity for evil. We're just trying to keep it below the surface. So let's go to the next part of this whole sermon, which is the idea of like what we typically do to try to make it go away, to try to suppress it. And Keller's point number 2 is entitled "What Won't Work." What won't work on this problem? Because the typical solution that people try to do is the direct application of the moral law to the human heart. Right. So I say, well, I will try to do, and I'll try to suppress that, and I'll try to be very, very good. And he says, like, all religion, actually he was quoting C.S. Lewis at one point, saying all religions have a moral code, and the moral codes, actually most religions are pretty similar. We form moral communities in many different religions to try to read the moral law, get together, and through the, understand what the law is telling us to do, and through the application of willpower and effort, try to overcome our pride and our self-centeredness and try to become good people. And this is really interesting because I think a lot of Christians think that's the way. Yes, exactly. That's what Christianity is supposed to be. That's why I go to church every Sunday. I'm supposed to try hard to be a better person. And that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think the shock that Paul in Romans 7 is saying that won't work on the human heart, it was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah. It's and then he also brings up that story about Saint Augustine.
Yeah. And he brings,
yeah, Saint Augustine was talking about how and this is I think an illustration of why it doesn't work, is like, as a kid, he was told not to take these pears off this one tree.
Right.
And he's like, but when I was told not to take the pears, the thing I wanted to do is go take the pears. And so he did. Right. And then he said, why did I take the pears? He said, I wasn't hungry. I don't even like pears. He took the pears because somebody told him they were forbidden. And right. That's part of the problem with the moral law, right? It doesn't, we don't have the power to, when we're told not to do something,
it inflames it. It makes it worse.
Yeah.
And that's verse. And so, the verse for that is verse 5 in Romans 7, verse 5. For while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions, aroused by the law, were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. In other words, the law was arousing that. And that story, by the way, is where we get the common phrase, forbidden fruit. Well, that's forbidden fruit. It's from Augustine's pear story. And but once it's forbidden, then you want it more than ever. So Paul's saying that the law has like a greenhouse effect, that it makes you want it even more.
And you mentioned this earlier. This is why one of the things in our heart, our heart absolutely hates being told how to live.
Exactly. That's the so
nobody wants to be told how they should live.
That's right. No one tells me what to do.
It's my life.
It's my life. And look, so I'm not a bad person. So, think about it, these are the things that keep you from coming to Christ, the things that keep you from salvation. I'm not a bad person. At some point, those of us who've been saved and tasted of the heavenly gift, so to speak, and know Jesus, it's because we had to admit at some point, I am a sinner and I have capacity for sin and I need salvation. There's this moral code and I can't keep it. I can't do it. I'm broken. I'm lost. And I need salvation. But the resistance in the human heart is, no, I won't admit that. I'm not a bad person. I am not. And I hate someone telling me I'm a bad person.
That's
and the second one here.
That's why the Sermon on the Mount is so powerful, because Jesus talks about, the 10 Commandments and how they're impossible. It's impossible to live according to them.
Well, that's exactly right. And right. And it actually ties right into this next section where Paul talks his little autobiographical sketch in verses 8 and 9. This is where he talks about his pre-Christian life, right? In verse 8, but sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Oh, wait, I should probably start at 7. What should we then say? That the law is good, is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. Now, verse 8. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. In verse 9, I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. And that's fascinating because you remember, like in our last Bible study, Greg, we were talking about this huge theme in the Bible that's not just a progression of bad to good. It's not a conversion of bad to good. It's death to life, constantly death to life. And Paul's using the same thing about death to life metaphor to say, I was alive pre-Christian. I was alive because I was keeping the law and I was a decent person. And I thought I was still in the running. I was still alive. And Keller says it's the way you talk about a team that's still that hasn't been disqualified yet. They're still in the race for the pennant and they're still alive. They're still in the running for the championship. So Paul thought he was alive. And then the 10th commandment comes along, and every other commandment can be read as external behavior. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie. And Paul said, I was keeping all those. The 10th commandment is just about the heart. Thou shalt not covet. You shouldn't want what you don't have. And then Paul is saying, when that came along, that just killed me. And so it's like you said, the Sermon on the Mount. That I had a friend who came to Christ, became a Christian because of the Sermon on the Mount, because he read it. He thought, I'm a decent person. His testimony in some ways is exactly like Paul in 7 verses 8 and 9. So I thought I was a decent person. And then I read the Sermon on the Mount. I realized all the laws I was trying to keep, it's not just the external behavior, it's the intent of my heart behind the law, underneath the law. So when Jesus says things like, you shall not, these things, shouldn't commit adultery, you say, right, I've never committed adultery, but he says, but you shouldn't look at a woman to lust after in your heart. Oh, so it's not just the external behavior, it's actually my heart that matters.
Yes.
Right. And my intent matters. And you say, well, I've never committed somebody, but if you say, you're fooled your brother, and we don't need to redo this Sermon on the Mount of these other passages, but that exact thing, like, it's not just the external behavior of the law. If it was that, I feel like I was alive, a good person. When I realized it was the intent of my heart, I'm dead. And in particular, if you're trying to keep the law, then you feel like I'm a really, really good person. And it's going to make you feel jealous of people who are better than you, right? And, like that person is more righteous than me. And so you're always comparing yourselves with others and you're filled with envy. And then you realize, wait a second. And that's what happened to Paul. Like, I'm not a good person. And that, I've got this really deep heart problem. And that's the theme of this chapter, the splitness of the human heart. Even if your external behavior is good, you think you're good, you think you're moral, you've got a deep, deep sin problem. Way worse than you think.
So, are we saying that the potion then for Dr. Jekyll was like the 10 Commandments for Paul?
Oh, yeah, or that's interesting.
One commandment was the potion that got Paul.
The 10th commandment is like the potion that got Paul because it revealed to him the splitness of his heart. That's really good, Greg. I think that's right. Yeah, Keller doesn't bring that up, but I think you're right.
So then Dr. Jekyll realized what's happening. He makes some decisions in the book. He says, no more potion.
Right.
And he's going to work twice as hard as being a good person, being more gentle, being more upright than he had been. And then to his surprise and disappointment, Hyde shows up again.
Yeah, and that was a bone-chilling passage in the book. Keller kind of reads that section of the book out loud, and I didn't I don't have it transcribed, but essentially the notion is he's sitting at a park bench and reflecting on how he stopped taking the potion. So he said, that's because Hyde was killing people, right? So Hyde was so bad, he was murdering people, and the police were closing in, and they could never find Hyde because when they looked for him, he turned back into Dr. Jekyll. But he said, I can't stop this. And so he became a really, really good person. And he was sitting in the park reflecting on what a great person he'd been. And he's thinking about how he cared for the poor and cared for his fellow man. And he said, I was sitting there comparing my good heart against the casual neglect of so many others and how good he was compared to them. And then he looked down, and to his horror, he had once again become Mr. Hyde without the potion. That
Yeah,
was, I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, it is bone chilling
it
because
is.
it wasn't the potion, it was his own self-righteousness,
Yeah.
right? And
And Keller also brings out the um it's not just the bad things that trip Christians up. It's the good things. It's when we make good things into ultimate things. That's one of the biggest sins that Christians deal with is we can avoid the bad things, right?
right, right, right.
Murdering it, um, you know, not murdering somebody, but what's impossible to avoid, because we have this splitness, because we have the sin dwelling in us,
Right.
is something is always competing for God for first place in our heart. And a lot of times it's good things that we make into ultimate things. And that's like just as sinful as blatant bad things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the epithumia, right? The idea of like taking a good thing. It's all I want to care about is my job. What's wrong with having a job? I care about my kids. What's wrong with my kids? You take those things and make them ultimate things. They become idols in your life, right? Um, but here at this point, when we were talking about the Jekyll and Hyde story, I actually thought about you, Greg, because you have the illustration you talk about the three crosses, right? And because Keller talks about two different ways to be your own savior and Lord. The first is we say, I just want to do whatever I want. I got to live whatever the way I want to live because I'm afraid that God will oppress me. So I got to live any way I want to live. And the other way is when you say, I'm going to be so good that God has to bless me. Right. And so one is follow the rules and the other is follow your heart. So your illustration of the two
Yeah,
thieves.
I call this illustration the three ways to live. There's three ways that people tend to live their lives. One is follow the rules, which, the example in the Bible is the Pharisees, teachers of the law, the religious people. Or follow your heart, which that's the second way, which is the tax collectors and sinners, just kind of doing what they want. Or you can follow Jesus. And the whole point of the gospel is it's a third way. And just like Jesus was crucified between two thieves, one on his left and one on his right, there's two thieves of the gospel that Christians can struggle with. And it's easy for us to slide one way or the other, to fall into the trap of just trying to follow the rules. Or we just say, hey, Christ died for my sins, past, present, and future, just live however I want.
Right.
Those are two errors that Christians can fall into when it comes to their sanctification, their Christian growth. We need to continually follow Jesus, and that involves surrender. So, one of the things that I pick out in this passage that I really like, I'm so glad that Paul is telling us he struggled.
Yes.
Because I can relate to that. I think everybody in their heart of hearts should understand that the Christian life is a struggle. Yeah. And we are struggling with sin on a daily basis. And so that also reminds me that the Christian life is a constant surrender. Yes. That we surrender our lives for our salvation, but we need to, Jesus talked about picking up your cross daily and following him, that there's a surrender that happens on a daily basis in our sanctification.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think that progression of sanctification is more and more, and this is the kind of splitness of the two lines that we were talking about before, using splitness in a different way, more and more realizing that on that graph of holiness, my line goes down and down and downward, because as I go through time, I realize more and more how sinful I really am. At the same time, my conception of God gets greater and greater and greater. I realize how holy he really is. So that line would continue, it goes up and up and up and up. And it's the cross that bridges that gap. But in gospel-driven transformation, gospel-driven sanctification, that cross doesn't just start me in the Christian life. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. So I'm filled with gratitude for what he's done for me, right? I want to go back and dwell on something a second ago, because we had a conversation about this the other day. We didn't record it, but it was exactly the kind of podcast conversation we should have recorded, because it's kind of gave rise to this, about some Christians who say, well, Jesus died for my sins, past, present, and future. So I don't ever have to confess, or I don't ever repent. Remember that? And I knew people that said that, and you did too. So we should just talk about that for a second.
I think it's a dangerous teaching for sure. And it'll start off often where people will say, well, how many of your sins were future when Jesus died on the cross? And of course, since he lived 2,000 years ago, they were all future, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, and I do believe Jesus died for my sins, past, present, and future. Right. But that doesn't give me the license to just live however I want. And I don't think that's what the Bible teaches is to live. And some will call this like the freedom of Christ, like, Christ came to set us free. And they'll tie it into the whole idea of like, hey, God wants you to be free, so you're free to live however you want. But I don't think that's biblical at all, because there's too many other passages that talk about, Romans 12, 1 and 2. I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Don't be conformed to the world any longer, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So,
that's a great passage, Greg. And I think that teaching is in such conflict with just teachings like when Jesus teaches us to pray in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us this day our daily trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Right. He tells us you should be confessing your sins all the time. But it's also a big point of this passage where Paul is saying the point of the law, the purpose of the law, is to illustrate and highlight your sin. And you're not supposed to stop keeping the law when you become a Christian. You're not supposed to say, hey, I'm free from the law. You're supposed to say, I can't believe that God saves someone as sinful as me. And you're so overwhelmed with gratitude, you want to keep it even more. Yeah. That's what propels you forward. And that's the whole contrast. It's not the application of willpower to your hideous nature. That's in this Keller sermon, he says that's exactly what won't work. That's what Paul's saying. That's exactly what won't work. But what will work is you see the law, it illustrates your sinful nature. As you're a Christian, you try to continue to keep it. It just shows you how sinful you are. And you realize, I'm even more grateful today that he saved a wretch like me than I was yesterday. And I want to keep it. I want to keep the law. That's the sequence. That's exactly how it all works. It fits together, how it works, right? But the people who say, well, but past, present, and future, so therefore I do anything I want, like, well, that's kind of a dangerous teaching, because I think it's the act of contrition and repentance daily and saying, Lord, I'm recognizing my sin. I'm still a sinner. Like Paul's doing in Romans 7. I am deeply split. I don't do the things I want to do. I'm sorry about that.
And he called himself the chief of sinners.
Exactly right. Exactly. That's what Paul said. But that's what makes me grateful for the cross.
Absolutely. So let's move to the last point, which is what will work.
Right. What will work?
What will work? What do you remember from that? By the way, it's July 3rd. We're recording this, and I've got like a fireworks show right out my window.
Oh, yes.
One of my neighbors bought some pretty big fireworks. I don't think this is a community fireworks show. I think this is a neighborhood one, but
maybe someday we'll do this on video. We'll post a video on YouTube. We'll be some nice studio together, but now by I can see your face and I can see the light of the fireworks flashing on your face as you're recording. It's kind of
it's a little bit distracting. It's a little bit distracting if I'm honest, and I'm not sure if the noises are coming through, but and I'm thinking, how long is this show going to go? But yeah, what does he say about what will work?
So he goes back to Romans 1 through 7, the beginning of the chapter, and that's why the outline is progressing from the back to the front, right? And they say, well, what will work is, first of all, in verse like 1 through 7, and he says things like, is the law like verse 7? What should we say then? The law is sin? Is the law bad? And to those people who say, well, Jesus died past, present, future, I don't need to keep the law. I have complete freedom. Like, do I throw the law out? Is Christianity the law doesn't apply? And that's not the answer. you need the law to be aware of sin, and the law is bringing you awareness of sin. And the way we're talking about conceptualizing the Christian life, the progress in the Christian life is marked by your growing awareness of your sin and your growing awareness of his holiness. That's what convinces you that the gap between you and him is huge and needed someone to fill that gap. That's what makes you grateful for Jesus filling the gap for you. It's your growing awareness of that. And the law is what's helping you do that. And as you try to keep the law as your Christian even more and more, you realize my heart is so wicked, I can't do this, right? But you absolutely do need the law. We must follow the law. But verse 1-4, the point is you're not being married to the law. And I thought this was interesting because it's another death to life thing.
Yeah.
It's another, well, so that whole, we were talking before about so many things that the Bible talks about is moving from death to life. It's not being a bad person, I'm a good person. It's you were dead in your sins. Now you're alive in Christ. It's death to life as one of the primary metaphors for talking about Christianity and Christian conversion. And here he's talking about death as well, but he's in the context of marriage. And this whole verse 1-4 we read a minute ago talks about, a married woman is bound by law to her husband as while he lives, but if her husband dies, this is verse 2, she is released from the law of marriage. It's a long passage on the metaphor of marriage, but the point is when there's a death, then you're released from that law. And to summarize quickly, it is when before you were a Christian, you were in a way married to that law, and it's the death of Christ. So there's a death involved. It's releasing you from that, and you can be released from that and then free to follow Jesus. Because beforehand you were married to the law and you were getting your self-regard, your self-image, your self-understanding. We're all kind of programmed by your actions and what you did. And now all that's been wiped away because there's a bit of death involved, and that's releasing you from that marriage you had to the law. That was my quick takeaway, Greg. I don't know if you heard anything else or thought of anything else for that.
I think you did a good job summarizing, and I'm still being distracted by these fireworks out. This fireworks show.
Well, let me just read then, Greg, while you're watching the fireworks here, verses 3 and 4. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law. And if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. And the point there is that you died to the law. There's been a death involved. It's not your death, Jesus' death. And then you can be freed from what you were married to before you were a Christian to belong to another, to belong to Jesus.
So my question is then, if we died to the law, then why do we need to keep? Can you explain further? Like, okay, if we died to the law, then why do we still keep the law?
I out of sheer love for Jesus, out of sheer gratitude of what he's done for me. Because the notion you said before,
is it kind of a thing that like we don't end up focusing on the law themselves. We just, because of our love for, like I heard a speaker one time that I really respect, and he talked about the difference that like our relationship with the law after we become believers is like, instead of, before we're believers, it's like, you shall have no gods before me. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder.
Right.
That like, once you surrender to Jesus, once you're following Jesus and you're repenting of your sinfulness and surrendering, that it's more like, oh, you'll have no gods before you. You will not commit it. It's like you don't focus on the actual law, like, but you just
look like. So you stick with the marriage metaphor because that's what we're supposed to talk about now. When you fall in love with somebody and you want to marry, when you first fell in love with your wife and I fell in love with, you're just so in love, you want to do the things that please them. You want to change your life. You're like, oh, what is she like? What are her preferences? What are her favorites? I want to get that. What's your favorite? Whatever it is, you're really trying to please that person because you're so in love with them. And the part here that to tie this back to the Jekyll and Hyde, the marriage thing, that Keller did this in the sermon where he was talking about it. He was talking about how Hyde was, we use the word Hyde because he was so hideous. He's almost, and if you read the book, he's like physically ugly because of his self-centeredness and all that. It's a representation of the hideousness of our nature. And then they took you to, Keller did, to Isaiah. Remember that? Isaiah 52 or 53, where he says, Jesus, we should look it up. He says Jesus was,
beyond recognition, marred.
that's
Like,
right.
yeah, he had
Right.
no beauty or majesty that we should, yeah, that he became hideous in our place.
Exactly. He was completely beautiful at the Father's side before he came down. And in our place, he became completely hideous. He took on all our hideous nature on himself.
So that we might become beautiful.
Beautiful in God's eyes. And so what you're doing, we say, this is death that has released me from the law of sin, right? But now I'm just staring at the bridegroom. I'm staring at the bridegroom who became hideous for me in my place, took on all my hideousness, right? And I say my heart melts because of that. And I say, I just want to be part of you. So I can't do anything to make myself more holy in God's eyes by keeping the law. I can't make myself more. He's already given me he's given me his righteousness by faith, salvation by faith. My standing is 100% complete. I don't become less righteous in his eyes because I sinned today, or more righteous because I kept the law. I'm righteous in his eyes purely because of the blood of Christ. But because I'm grateful for that, I want to get rid of the sin that plagues me and still drags me down, and the self-centeredness that still gets at me. I want to shed those things and follow him completely. And
do you think this is why Jesus like simplified the law when he said, which is the greatest commandment? And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's like, if you do those two things, then you will keep all the 10 commandments.
Yeah. If you really love God that way, yeah, absolutely. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, I do, I'm not sure I'm 100% clear on, and I'm not sure how much money my neighbors spent on these fireworks, but
some people like fireworks.
They are going. Can you hear them?
Oh yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought. These are impressive fireworks. These are not like small, these are not little like firecrackers. These are a big deal. I don't know what's happening out there, but yeah, I mean, it is kind of interesting, the relationship between I think I'm still a little, I'm not sure I totally grasp, what our relationship with the law is.
You should keep it.
Keep it. Yeah.
Don't give up. Don't give up keeping it. Try harder.
But I keep it, but I'm not trying to. The whole point is that, like in this Jekyll and Hyde thing, that Jekyll tried to, I mean, this is where it kind of comes in, like, I don't try to do it in my own strength. I don't try to, I don't want to do it on that single line illustration. I keep the law because my view of the gospel is growing. And
so like, for example, you should keep all the Christian disciplines. You should be reading the word. You should be memorizing it. You should be doing that. But all those things you should be going to attend worship. All those things focus you back on Jesus and what he did for you.
So here's, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but this is something I do get. It's the difference between I have to do something and I get to do something.
I want to do it. I want to do it because I want to please my bride.
When you're surrendered to Christ, you want to do it. You get to do it. So, like, instead of you have to go to church, you have to attend Bible study, you have to, read the Bible every day. No, it's like, and I experience this. I don't know if you do. I'm guessing you do too, Jim. Just knowing you, that you get to do those things.
Oh yeah.
And you want to do them because you get to do them. You want to do them.
Yeah.
So I read the Bible every day, and I enjoy it. Now, are there some days where I feel like I'm, making myself do it just to keep going in my Bible reading program? Yes, there sure are. But the vast majority of the days I do it, it's because I get to do it, not because I have to do it.
Yeah, out of sheer love and gratitude, right? Out of sheer love and gratitude. I mean, I'm trying to look up this. When Keller was reading this, I'm looking at Isaiah 53. Surely, this is Isaiah 53, verse 4. I just flipped to it in my Bible. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Greg, my heart just melts. I tear up even reading it. It's just like when you watch what your bridegroom did for you. And then, by the way, the tie-in here, because we're in Romans 7, is Romans 5, verse 8. God demonstrates his own love towards this, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died. And Jesus knew how bad you are, right? He knew everything about you. So he died for your future sins, like you saying that guy said. Like, he knew about those future sins, and he did it anyway. What he should have done is said, "Oh, I know what Greg's going to be like. I'm not dying for him. I know what Jim's going to be like. He's the last person I want to die for. Forget that." That's why Romans 5:8 is so amazing. That he knew we were going to be such wretched and blind sinners with all this split nature and the wickedness of our hearts and the self-centeredness and self-absorption. He died for us anyway. And once you get that, you say, watch, my bridegroom became hideous to it, gave up all his beauty to become hideous, took on my hideous nature to make me beautiful. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to follow him and serve him. Right? Not out of compulsion, not because I get more points with him, not because I get more rewards or get more standing in his eyes. I can't be any more righteous than I already am in his eyes. But I want to follow him. Right. So I think that sequence, that's how the gospel works in your heart.
I think that's a great way to just kind of end our conversation here, because that explains why we're gospel addicts.
Amen.
But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Amazing.
Wow.
Just amazing.
Well, thanks for listening to this episode of Romans 7. Stay tuned. Here comes the finale.
That's right.
Can you tell? Next time we'll be diving into Romans chapter 8. I hope you can join us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.